Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, keys to the game for the Clemson Tigers at home against South Carolina this weekend. Now, we just ran the same exact episode for South Carolina. Now we're going to take a look at it from a Clemson standpoint. And, we said this before, this game is so fascinating because you look at this matchup and say, I think there's a legitimate college football playoff berth on the line. Whatever team wins this football game has a very good argument and a very good chance to find themselves in that 12-team college football playoff. And if you're Clemson, you're sitting there the last team out. What better message to send to the committee than knocking off a top 15 ranked South Carolina team? If you want to make an argument to jump a team like Indiana or jump a team like SMU, this would be the game to do it. I think Clemson has been looking for that college football playoff caliber win. I don't think it gets much better than knocking off potentially one of the hottest teams that we see in all of college football, the South Carolina Gamecocks. Fired up to get into this one now. Before we do, and as always, I said it on the last episode, the South Carolina and Clemson fans, it's been a blast talking this game, and the amount of support y'all have shown the fellas has been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comment section. Without further ado, let's start really in the same position we started with South Carolina. The biggest key to this football game: what team creates more negative plays on defense? If there's one matchup that, if you're Clemson, you really like heading into this one, is that Clemson defensive line going up against a South Carolina offensive line that has struggled, and especially going on the road in a rowdy environment where it gets hard to hear the snap count, and you potentially have a true freshman starting a left tackle in Josiah Thompson, excuse me. If you're Clemson, you're looking to create negative plays. And I think it's really for two different reasons. And if there's one thing to be optimistic about, Clemson against Pitt, that was a sloppy game from Clemson that they figured out a way to win. But that defensive line dominated that football game. You go back to that game, 8 sacks, 14 tackles for loss for that Clemson front seven. This has been a unit that we all know how talented guys like TJ Parker and Peter Woods are. We wanted to see them kind of take control of football games a little bit more. We saw that against Pitt. If you want to beat a South Carolina team, this is mission number one if you're a Clemson fan. And it's really for two different reasons. One, creating negative plays, it's a massive role in winning football games and playing good defense, but particularly against a team like South Carolina, if you can figure out ways to create negative plays early in downs, first and second downs, and put South Carolina into some of those third and obvious passing situations, that really does favor Clemson. Because you look at Lenore Sellers, who has taken massive strides as a pocket passer. I think we've all appreciated that. That is still not where South Carolina wants to operate. One, because you have some question marks about the offensive line holding up. And that's just where Lenore Sellers continues to probably be least comfortable as a quarterback, operating from the pocket, going through his progressions and delivering accurate footballs. Lenore Sellers has gotten better at it. You want to make him be good at it on the road against Clemson. Now, particular matchups that you're looking at, it really is coming from these edge rushers. If there's a position on the offensive line that South Carolina has struggled with, it's probably Josiah Thompson at left tackle, who's given up 32 quarterback hurries on the year, and it's probably been Kason Henry on the right side, who's given up 28 quarterback hurries. And you might see a little bit of Tree Babalede as well, who's another a young tackle that I really like for South Carolina. But if you're Clemson, you look at TJ Parker and potentially Peter Woods playing a little bit more edge in this football game. Those are the matchups that you want to dominate. And it's going to be really important for this interior defensive line, guys like Peyton Page, to be disruptive as well, because Lenore Sal is going to try to step up and get outside the pocket. You got to try to make sure not only are you getting pressure on South Carolina and trying to, get Lenore Sellers a little heated up where he has been prone to turn the football over, but you also want to make sure you're keeping him in the pocket, because we all know how dangerous Lenore Sellers can be when he's outside the pocket, which is a nice segue to, kind of key number two, and that is linebacker play. One matchup that I do think favors Clemson here is what these linebackers can do, not only as athletes in coverage, but also going sideline to sideline. One of the biggest stories that Clemson has heading into this matchup is, hey, how do we keep Lenore Sellers from beating us as an athlete? When Lenore Sellers is playing his best football, he's getting outside the pocket, he's using his legs to move the chains, he's extending plays. You got a guy in LeBaron Carter, potentially Wade, potentially Sammy Brown. All three of them are athletic enough to go kind of play that quarterback spiral and that run and chase. Hey, when Lenore Sellers wants to get outside the pocket, Barry Carter, you are gunning it and trying to go make a play in space. There's just not a lot of teams in the country that have linebacker play that you feel comfortable making plays on Lenore Sellers in space. Clemson has those linebackers. So I think linebackers kind of, playing that quarterback spiral in terms of trying to limit the amount of times Lenore Sellers can beat you as an athlete. That's number one. Number two, you look at South Carolina. Where do they like to run that passing attack through? They like to run it through their tight ends and running backs, which is largely oftentimes you have your linebackers responsible for those kind of pass catchers. Again, Wade Woodaz as a former safety, Barrett Carter being a freak athlete along with Sammy Brown. I think you have the athletes to potentially take away some of the most productive pass catchers that we've seen in the South Carolina offense. Now, again, to give South Carolina credit over the last couple weeks, these pass catchers on the outside have stepped up. But in a game like this, you might see South Carolina try to lean back into what they do best, and that is getting the running backs involved in the screen game, getting the tight ends involved in the flats. We've seen South Carolina do that all year. If you're Clemson, can you, one, keep Lenore Sellers from hurting you as an athlete, which is going to fall largely on the linebackers? And then number two, can you try to deal with some of these pass catchers in Rocket Sanders and Josh Simon? Josh Simon leads the team with 43 targets. Rocket Sanders, 26 targets out of the backfield as a pass catcher. They want to get him involved in space. The linebackers are going to have to play a role in trying to stop Josh Simon and deal with Rocket Sanders. Now, going to the offensive side of the football, I think key number one, you got to try to stay on schedule if you're Clemson. And this is something they did not do a very good job of against Pitt. They found themselves, especially in that second half, in so many third and long situations because they couldn't get that run game going. Look, South Carolina is a top 10 rushing defense in the country. Do I think Clemson is going to run the football for 250 yards on Saturday? No. But can you run the football effective enough to stay out of those third and long situations? Because that is where South Carolina wants to live. You look at the recipe for South Carolina and why they've been so good on defense. Hey, we're stopping the run on first and second down, and we are teeing off on the passer when it gets into those third and obvious passing situations. You do not want, if you're Clemson, to be in those third and long spots. Look, 2nd and 6, 3rd and 2s, those aren't going to kill you. If Phil Moffitt doesn't have a 20-plus yard run, but he's averaging 4 yards per carry, that's a win for me if I'm Clemson, because you don't want to be kind of backed up, and especially with some of the injuries that Clemson's had on the offensive line. You don't want to be in those third and long situations with guys like Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard getting obvious pass rushing situations where they really get to pin their ears back and get after Cade. I think the last key for Clemson here, hit your home runs. Clemson's offense from an efficiency standpoint has struggled at times. Why they've been a pretty dang good offense in 2024 has been they've been hitting the home runs much better than they hit them in 2023. You look at Clemson and say they're top 10 in the country in 50-plus yard plays with 10 of them. If Clemson wants to win this football game, you probably feel like Clemson has to have one or two of those kind of plays in this game. And then we kind of said the same thing for South Carolina. I think both fan bases have a lot of confidence in their defenses heading into this matchup. And quite frankly, I think it's hard for both fan bases to look at the opposing the offenses and say, hey, we're going to move the football consistently down the field. These defenses, I think, are just too good. And so if you want to put points up on the board, you want to find, so I'm not going to say free plays, but you want to find some of those plays where, hey, instead of going 12 plays, 80 yards, avoiding penalties and avoiding sacks and punching it in the end zone, can we go 3 plays, 70 yards and score a touchdown with a 40-yard touchdown pass? That's kind of what you're looking for here. So can Clemson continue those kind of home run plays? And I think one of the biggest revelations for Clemson this year, guys like Brian Wesco and guys like TJ Moore have worked vertically down the field exceptionally well. That's the biggest difference between the Clemson version we saw week 1 against Georgia and the Clemson version we're getting heading into this matchup. They're hitting explosive plays. You're going to need to have not only just chunk plays, you're going to need to have game-changing plays on the offensive side of the football if you want to put points up on South Carolina. This is an aggressive defense. They want to send some pressures. You're going to have some opportunities to hit those plays. Can you hit those plays and change the game? It's kind of what you're looking at. At the end of the day, I think this is a fascinating matchup where both teams kind of have similar goals heading in. Can we dominate with our defensive line? And can we find enough explosives to win this football game? Whatever team does that, whatever team has more tackles for loss and sacks and 30-plus yard plays, you could blind the rest of the box score to me, and I'd say I'm pretty confident that the team that comes out on the winning end of those two metrics is probably winning this football game. We'll pause it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. For the Clemson fans who are checking this out, go check the South Carolina one out too. I think there are some fascinating matchups there as well. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.